You've done well, Octavia. Sorry to have pushed that sudden request onto you. Octavia with a smile replied to Count. No, it is quite the honor for me to serve such a respectable person as a teacher. Right. You've always been like that. Count Marquez couldn't keep himself from making a wry smile to his wife's response, which had not a single shred of ill intent as always, and further questioned Octavia. So, what's Zenjirou-sama like? Lady Octavia frankly replied to the question of her husband with an eloquent tone. Yes, he seems to be a very likable person with a strong desire to learn. I believe that he can be trusted. I see. Count Marquez kept nodding while listening to his wife speaking about the prince consort for a while. So Count Marquez made his own interpretation of Octavia's words, which portrayed the man called Zenjirou as naively lenient to those under him and wise enough to understand his own position, with no manly virtues such as ambition or aspiration. After musing for some time, Count Marquez frankly asked for the opinion of his wife. Octavia, what kind of woman would you choose if you had to assign a concubine to Zenjirou-sama? However, the young lady widened her eyes once in surprise as she wasn't used to this kind of topic, then showed a bit of a wry smile and shook her head. I believe it would be in your best interest to stop whatever you are plotting. Suggested by Octavia. With curiosity Count asked, oh, why is that? While I only saw Her Highness and Zenjirou-sama together a handful of times, it does seem that the two of them are rather intimate from what I have heard from the waiting maids working in the inner palace or from Zenjirou-sama's daily conduct itself. I believe them to have a rather intimate relationship. Octavia reported with firm belief. Further she added. Even if a concubine were to come up to the inner palace now, she most likely would feel out of place. Count Marquez tilted his head in contemplation as he still couldn't assent with the frank words of his wife. He found it somewhat hard to imagine that there was a man who could love that Queen Aura to such an extent. The ideal woman for a man of the Karpa kingdom was more or less a woman like his second wife sitting in front of him. In Count Marquez's eyes, Aura Karpa was too good to be a woman as a ruler, but not very attractive as a single woman. Count Marquez asked again as if to make sure. Are you saying that Zenjirou-sama loves Her Highness Aura with all of his heart? Lady Octavia's opinion didn't waver on her husband's reconfirmation and she replied distinctly. Yes, there is no doubt about it. Seeing as he lacks ambition and the desire for power, I would go as far as to say that the only reason that he abandoned his own world to come here was his love for Her Highness. He became absorbed in thought with a serious face for a while. In that case, it would be better to take the approach of supporting their relationship for now. The conclusion he finally reached was a rather defensive one. Yes, I believe that to be the best choice as well. Octavia smiled happily from the bottom of her heart and nodded to the deduction of her husband. The Marquez family was already a distinguished family with plenty of influence in the current politics, but his position wasn't one where he needed to make any risky bets. If the relationship between the Queen and her husband was that good, it might be better for him to constantly gain the Queen's favor by supporting their intimate relationship for the time being. Count Marquez showed a bit of a wry smile and muttered. Still, I just don't get Zenjirou-sama's taste in women. Around the same time, Queen Aura visited the training ground of the royal army outside the capital in a long time. Today, Dragonback archery knights, said to be the elite unit amongst the army, were occupying the training ground. Accompanied by General Puyalgian, Aura let her eyes wander over the knight mustered before her. She currently wore a military uniform. Her attire was primarily red, the color representing the royal family, and had golden patterns embroidered on the sleeves and collar. A hushed silence overlay the training ground. That very silence told of the high discipline of the knights. It would be one thing for just humans, but every knight before her was mounted on a raptorial dragon. As she was satisfied with the result, Aura nodded once, then softly cracked the short whip in her right hand into her left hand and gave an order. Begin. Aye. Begin the maneuver. General Puyal, standing next to Aura, forwarded her order to the knights with a loud voice matching his imposing stature. The knights raised a voice like a bellow, then spurred their raptorial dragons with their whips, ready to show of the results of their daily training. Then they vigorously displayed the fruit of their practice in front of the Queen and General. Aura called out to General Puyal beside her. Quite formidable. I am impressed you trained them so well. The ambitious general lowered his head faithfully on the Queen's appraisal. Yes, thank you for your kind words. At present, we finally surpassed the 80% mark of the required force. This year, or no later than next year, we will have the proposed count assembled. Aura openly praised General Puyal on a rare occasion. In fact, his achievements were quite admirable. It had been the Dragonback archery knights, the main pillar of the army, who took the most damage in the previous Great War. An immense amount of money and time was needed to replenish the night troops. It was indeed a meritorious deed to replenish the original count within 5 to 6 years. General Puyol kept his grim expression even while the queen praised him, and replied with a shake of the head. Please direct these words at the breeders of the dragon stables. This achievement is mainly thanks to them. You are right. Aura honestly consented to General Puyol's sound argument. In comparison, the lifespan of a raptorial dragon was around 50 years. A long life prolonged the deployment in battle, but at the same time, it also prolonged the time a raptorial dragon needed to be ready for battle after birth. It had been an extraordinary effort on the breeders' part as they managed to raise and feed the dragons, which ate even more than horses, during the ongoing war, where the budget had been cut drastically, without any casualties. Come to think of it, it seems like we will be able to increase the military budget for a bit next year. I will let you know the exact number later, so make plans how to use it. Aura informed General Puyol with a satisfied smile. Zenjirou had disclosed the tax evasion from the feudal lords with his recalculation. Aura managed to increase the national budgeting to a reasonable extent and decreed that the majority of it was to be contributed to the military budget. General Puyol smiled for the first time today from hearing Aura's words. Understood. Luckily, most of the prominent military brass will be in the capital for the banquet in 2 days. I presume it will not take all too much time for me to hand in a report. She had anticipated it of course, but this ambitious general actively sought a connection to the prince consort. Her husband had not the slightest bit of ambition while the general was practically a mass of it. On a glance they appeared incompatible like water and oil, but the interesting part about humans was that people like them could become best friends forever. My little sister is looking forward to it as well. I would very much welcome it if Zenjirou-sama could spare some time for her. I see. Then I will tell my husband accordingly. General Puyol displayed his ambition as open as ever, whereat Aura responded with these words in a calm tone without any agitation. In a country that does not have any electricity, it takes a horrifying large amount of money to hold a banquet at night. Countless chandeliers in all sizes hung down from the high ceiling to illuminate the large banquet hall, but the candles burning on them were not cheap, even by the noble standards. Additionally, the chandeliers itself were super luxury items in this world, too. After all, glass manufacture didn't exist here. The chandeliers were all made out of silver and natural crystals. Even one of the smaller kind was worth a little fortune. Moreover, the red carpet covering the entire room was an unique item, woven by experts over 3 generations. And the tall tables, well stocked with food and drinks, were extravagance pieces, each carved from a single trunk by a skilled carpenter. A night banquet arranged by the royal palace. This event was a periodical social gathering for the upper class, but at the same time the perfect chance to show off the authority of royalty to the kingdom. Zenjirou was setting foot into this kind of banquet hall for the first time ever, and he desperately dealt with the greeting flood from the nobles with an affected smile under the light of the chandeliers. Let me introduce him to you, Zenjirou. This man is Baron Pantoja. In the previous war, he served as a commander for the knights and now he is providing his services as a feudal lord. Aura had her left arm linked with Zenjirou's right arm and introduced the middle-aged man standing in front of them with these words. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Zenjirou-sama. Her Highness was too good to me in granting me the title of a baron. My name is Thomas Pantoja. Yes, thank you for your greeting, Baron. My pleasure. Zenjirou made a generous nod, whereat the middle-aged man, introduced as Baron Pantoja, raised his lowered head. Zenjirou watched the Baron leave and made a soft sigh, careful that no one nearby noticed it. This is tiring. Keeping a correct posture, not forgetting to smile and never adopting the wrong tone. That was all he had to do, yet he felt an unbelievable fatigue because of the unfamiliar clothes and the pressuring glances on him from all sides. Zenjirou knew the ropes of remembering the faces and names of his business partners from his salaryman days, but it had never been more than 5 people at once. Due to that, extremely rude keywords like fat guy wearing a flower-patterned shirt or old lady looking like a purple fur were floating around in Zenjirou's head. Aura quietly left his side, took a silver goblet from the table and returned to him. Zenjirou. Oh, thanks, Aura. Zenjirou took the offered goblet from Aura and realized that he had been rather thirsty. To begin with, a banquet like this required no specific techniques like a dance party, nor did he have to follow a great number of rules like during a public event. In that way, it was not a bad choice for Mr. Superficial Royalty to make his debut into higher society here. Aura signalized a nearby waiting maid, who was working as a waitress, with her eyes when she saw how Zenjirou had emptied his goblet. The waitress swiftly approached them, took the empty goblet from Zenjirou and left. As Aura had waited for this moment, where a bit of his nervousness was washed away by the refreshment, she called out to the nobles, who stood at a fair distance. It was a pair of a man and a woman. It was Octavia, the wife of Count Marquez. She wore a modest traditional attire and stood out all the more, since a lot of the present women wore a dress-like wardrobe from the northern continent like Aura, seemingly in fashion right now. In that case, the plump middle-aged man next to her must be Count Manuel Marquez. Zenjirou observed him, as careful as possible that his gaze wasn't noticed. Wah, I've heard about it before, but their age difference really is like father and daughter. It's a dream of every man to have a beautiful second wife. Aura suddenly squeezed his right arm stronger when his thoughts wandered into an insolent territory. Zenjirou flinched for a second, thinking she had read his mind, but recalled right away that it was the sign they had agreed upon beforehand. Namely a signal for important people, whom she wanted him to remember the face, name and first impression of as best as possible. It is a pleasure to see you again, Your Highness Aura. And I am delighted to make your acquaintance, Zenjirou-sama. Thank you very much for the invitation today, Your Highnesses. I've heard only good things about you, Count Marquez. Your wife has taken good care of me. You honor me, Zenjirou-sama. Aura had no intention to embarrass her husband in the public eye as he wasn't used to such occasions, so she took the lead while still linking arms with him. Do not be so modest, Count. Your wife is as intelligent and beautiful as they say. I would very much like for you two to continue to aid our country with your skills. We are hardly worth of your generous words. Thank you very much. Zenjirou generally relinquished the conversation to Aura and only gave agreeable responses like "Oh ho, I see" or "Yes, indeed," when the attention shifted towards him. Rather avoid leaving a bad impression instead of making a good one was the name of the game. Or even better, he shouldn't leave an impression at all, considering his difficult standing as the prince consort. Thus Zenjirou's debut into higher society made a good start. To begin with, the main goal today was to show off how well Aura and Zenjirou got along to the public. For that reason, she couldn't keep covering for him with a hold on his arm forever. If she were to continue it, it would start to substantiate the rumor that Aura was restricting the freedom of her husband. Separated from Aura, Zenjirou slowly walked around the hall. Many people gave him curious gazes, but no one dared to approach the royal man. It was basically considered impolite for someone of lower standing to call out to someone of higher standing in this country. And although a bit of discourtesy was put up with at relatively slack gatherings like a banquet, only a few people were allowed to call out to a direct royalty like Zenjirou. Oh well, guess I'll have to talk to someone. In search for a person he could safely call out to as a royalty, he let his gaze slowly wander around the hall. At that time. Excuse me, Zenjirou-sama. May I have a bit of your time? A well-built man in the prime of his life came up to him from the side and called out to him like that while kneeling down on one knee. No way, someone approached me. Who's this guy? Zenjirou encountered a situation said to be technically impossible in his manner lessons and fell into an inward panic. Even so, he reflexively tensed up his expression and slowly turned to the kneeling man. The man had a well-trained build so huge that Zenjirou could tell on a glance that he was tall even when he was kneeling. Judging by the numerous tassels on his left arm, this giant seemed to occupy a top-ranking position in the current military. He truly looked like a knight as he kneeled on the red carpet under the light of the chandeliers. If someone were to approach Zenjirou, it would be a bold man that more or less paid no attention to etiquette. Or otherwise an overly ambitious man, who assertively sought a connection to the prince consort even on the risk of falling into disgrace with him. Oh, Sir Puyol. What is it? Zenjirou cleared his throat once, then spoke out the name of the man. General Puyol Gian. He had heard this name numerous times before. There was no way he wouldn't be aware of the man, who had been the other candidate for becoming Aura's husband apart from Sir Rafaelo Marquez. Aura, too, had often described him as a dangerous character. Yes, I have this small gift that I would very much like to offer to you, Zenjirou-sama. For that very reason, I have called out to you, fully aware it was against etiquette. Hiding his feelings behind a mask, Zenjirou broke the ice with harmless words. General, there's no need to kneel in such a place. Aye. Excuse me. General Puyol smoothly stood up on Zenjirou's words. Zenjirou quelled his urge to back off as the general stood dignified in front of him. He was huge. Then go ahead. You said something about a present? Zenjirou looked the one head taller General Puyol straight into the eyes and organized the information inside his head. He was taught in advance about the possibility that someone comes up with a present to him in this place. It seemed that this world shared the moral concept of gaining someone's favor through presents. As I recall, I can't turn it down without a good reason. The prickly question is how to accept it. General Puyol was ignorant to Zenjirou's inner turmoil and lowered his head once more with, yes, then signalized a young knight, apparently his subordinate, behind him with his eyes. General Puyol was ignorant to Zenjirou's inner turmoil and lowered his head once more with, yes, then signalized a young knight, apparently his subordinate, behind him with his eyes. He brought the actual item with him, not just a certificate. Zenjirou had been told that the usual procedure of giving something to someone in such a place was to first hand over a certificate here and then send the actual item to the residence at a later date. After all, it concerned presents from nobility or royalty. It was not all that unusual to give away a well-bred raptorial dragon or a summer residence. Of course it wasn't out of question to directly hand over items of handheld size like jewelry or treasured swords, but it was rarely practiced. Because it saved one the embarrassment if the item brought was rejected on the spot.